Now, sexual energy is something you might have felt because sometimes when we talk about energy, it becomes like, oh, but it's this vague thing. I'm not sure if I believe in energy or what is sexual energy even to begin with. But I'm sure that you felt sexual energy in the sense of if you feel like an attraction, if you feel like juicy, if you feel like turned on, if you feel like, oh, there's some sort of like desire and you have acted on that and that turned into the physical act of sex, then there was sexual energy that was running in your body that was making you move somewhere. Hi, my name is Dieke, and you are listening to my podcast where I give you a look into my life as a former business consultant, now Tantra teacher and speaker. If you're interested in self-development and really receiving the education that you should have had growing up, specifically around your femininity, sexuality, love, and relationships, then you found the right place. It's here where I share my life's journey, which once was heady, numb, unorgasmic, and basically me trying to be like a man, all while shaming and blaming anything that actually made me a woman, just blindly following the path that society set out for me, to ditching my imagined corporate career, moving my ass to Bali, setting up my business, meeting and marrying my soulmate, and becoming a Tantra teacher. I'm now on a mission to make all of this feminine and tantric wisdom that I've gathered over the past years modern, down to earth, and easily applicable. And I work with you, smart, intellectual, successful, strong, independent woman, to balance out your powerful masculine side with more softness, surrender, playfulness, love, and pleasure. Basically, alivening and juicing up your daily and relationship life. If you're curious on how to work with me, then check out all the information in the podcast description. And for now, welcome to a new episode. Welcome to a new episode. Today's episode is inspired by a client that I'm currently working with. And during one of our sessions together, we dove into the subject of her sexuality, of her sex life, also specifically in connection to her partner. Now, one of the things that she basically shared and that we both realized is, okay, she has this expectation of their intimacy or sex having to be this hot and heavy, kind of like orgasmic thing. And that if she is not feeling like that, or if that is not alive between the two of them, then, well, we have nothing to work with, or why even try? And I thought that was really interesting because then it made me realize, and we had a little discussion on this, that the thing that we've been taught about sex or our sexuality and what we see, and even when teachers talk about this, whether that's tantric teachers or teachers around like sexuality, very often the focus is all around more orgasms, like deeper, more profound pleasure, like all of this, like more fire, more juice, all of these kind of like external, big, fiery kind of feelings or principles around sexuality. Through this, we get a quite misconstrued kind of vision or image of what sex should be like, or intimacy or sexuality. And I feel it also limits us in the fact that, okay, if we have this expectation of this is how sex can be considered good, or this is when it's successful, then it basically limits and blocks us from a whole different kind of experience that sex and our sexuality can bring us. And also it puts this expectation and this goal onto it, which puts more pressure onto it, which then leads to basically many of us kind of like not really going there because we think it's like, oh, it feels like I need to be like this, and that's maybe not like me, or that's not me and my partner, or that's just not here anymore. And so then what do we do? And therefore, I felt inspired in this episode to basically share with you the key things that I wish I was taught around sex, around sexuality, that maybe gives you a different perspective also, and hopefully inspires a sense of curiosity to wanting to learn more around this and to really get kind of like the full spectrum vision of what sex and sexuality is all about and how it could look like, so that you feel inspired to, no matter where you're at in your life, to still connect to this part of you. Because I feel connecting to your sexuality or being connected to that part of you, it's actually linked to really like the core of who I am. If I'm not connected or connecting to my sexuality, then basically what I do is I cut myself off from my power, from my aliveness, from my creativity, basically from anything that makes me feel, I'm alive. I'm like participating. I'm like enjoying. And when I say enjoying, it's not even so much like, oh, I need to like be happy and excited and full of pleasure, but enjoyment or fulfillment or that deep sense of, but I'm connected to myself can also come and be present when you're feeling kind of like you're in a downswing in your life, when you're feeling you might be dealing with lots of like heavy emotions of sadness or grief or whatever that is. Because I feel what the connection to our sexuality does, it's that basically it keeps us really, really present and really alive with whatever is going on. It basically invites a certain amount of like orgasmicness and bliss into every experience, every moment of life that we're having. And so when I say orgasmicness, I think this is one of the main things already to dive into, is that there's so many different flavors of orgasmicness. And when I say orgasmicness, that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, I'm having this like peak, like heavy, hot and heavy, fiery kind of release kind of sensation while I'm experiencing grief or sadness. No, that's not necessarily the truth there. But orgasmicness, I see it more, I define it more as this sense of openness and aliveness and like, expansion in my body, in my being, fully being present, fully being here with myself, and the ability to hold myself in love and acceptance. And so the reason for this being is that our sexuality is basically at the very core, at the very root of our being. It's linked to our instinctual nature, our primal instinctual biology, because basically at the very core, there's a part of us that is basically like an animal here to procreate the next version of ourselves so we can keep evolving as a human species. And this is something that is just good to acknowledge and to be aware of. Because when we're not, what starts happening is that we cut ourselves off from this part. However, this part of us actually really impacts a lot of our system, our hormonal system, like the way we function, the way we think, the way we feel, the way we behave. It really is rooted in our instinctual primal nature. So learning to understand that aspect of yourself and really just embracing it basically gives you more power and empowers you to come up with creative and intelligent ways to work with that in your normal life instead of basically being a slave of it. Now, this also means because it's connected to such a primal aspect, basically sexual beings here to procreate, that we are imprinted to basically behave and to move in life based on attraction, based on our sexual desires, based on our sexuality, based on our life force that leads us somewhere. Also, I really love to share the approach of the Taoist and Chinese medicine perspective around sexuality and around sexual energy. And they say that our sexual energy can be considered your life force energy, your creative energy. It's the energy that keeps you alive, that keeps you moving, that keeps you growing and evolving. And so therefore, it's really linked to your health and your overall health, your bodily health, your emotional health, your mental health. It's all linked to, okay, what is the connection to your life force energy? How alive is it? How free can it flow through your body? And so they basically believe that your sexual health is directly connected to your physical health. And that if there's stagnation in your sexual energy, in your life force energy, then that is at the very root of any sort of symptoms or diseases or things that you're experiencing, any ailments or illnesses. And so they created a whole science of how to work with our sexuality, with even our sexual energy, and how to make sure that that stays really nourished and activated and alive to make sure that the body stays healthy. And so therefore, it's so important to have that connection. And so when I say that connection, again, that can look in so many different ways. And this is the moment for me to kind of like dive into the things I wish I was taught around my sexuality and around this concept, because I think it would have avoided so much confusion, so much drama, so many misunderstandings in my life and in my relationships. Now, the first thing that I wish I was taught has to do with understanding that sex doesn't have to be per se like a physical thing. It's not per se only a physical expression or physical act. Instead, there is way more than that. And sex can be a physical act and can be focused around procreation or focused around pleasure, but there's also different purposes to it. There is such a thing as sexual energy, where there is a distinction you can make between sexual energy that is flowing in your body and that having to result in you physically having sex. I wish I was taught around sexual energy and what that means. So let me give a little bit of an explanation here. Sexual energy can also be considered this creative energy, this life force energy. I also like to call it this energy that gives you a spark. Now, sexual energy is something you might have felt, because sometimes when we talk about energy, it becomes like, oh, but it's this vague thing. I'm not sure if I believe in energy or what is sexual energy even to begin with. But I'm sure that you felt sexual energy in the sense of if you feel like an attraction, if you feel like juicy, if you feel like turned on, if you feel like, oh, there's some sort of like desire and you have acted on that and that turned into the physical act of sex, then there was sexual energy that was running in your body that was making you move somewhere. Now, sexual energy can have different kinds of purposes. I like to call this like the sexual energy framework to understand the different ways in which this energy can flow and also the different intentions and purposes that it can have. So often we've been only taught two purposes of sexual energy, and that is, as I just mentioned, procreation, to create a baby, or for pleasure. That are basically the two intentions that most of us have or know when it comes to sexual energy. And that's also what we act on, in the sense of, okay, then for pleasure, we're trying to physically get an orgasm, or we're having this physical interaction with our partner where we pleasure each other and touch each other's genitals and where we have penetration. And then maybe at some point we want to actually create a baby. So let's have sex for that reason. And it can still, of course, include pleasure also. But basically, that is all that we have been taught about it. And also we've been taught that that basically looks like physically interacting and touching each other. And in a way, that's also what needs to happen if you really want to procreate and create a baby. Yes, then you need to plug in and penetrate. Yes, then the man at least needs to have an orgasm to ejaculate so that you actually can get pregnant. Now, there's at least three other purposes of sexual energy that I know about and that I've experienced over the years and that I have learned about. And that is creativity and inspiration, healing, and transformation. So basically, that means that you can use sexual energy for these different kinds of purposes. And the reason for that being, again, sexual energy, life force energy, creative energy, the energy that gives you a spark. And so basically, it's the force behind your creativity, behind feeling inspired. And specifically, as a woman, we have our menstruation cycle, which can also be called our feminine sexual cycle. And so that basically means that our menstruation cycle is directly connected to our sexuality, to our instinctual nature, because the main purpose of it is for you to be fertile and for you to be able to procreate. But it also means that it's directly linked to creation, to inspiration, because basically you can create actual human life. But imagine that you use that energy for a different purpose, to create something else in your life. And so this is something you can actually use your sexual energy for, to manifest and to create way faster and way more impactfully than you would when you're fully being disconnected from your sexuality. Because someone that's completely disconnected from their sexual energy most likely isn't super creative, isn't super inspiring, because they're basically like a dull light. Their light, their spark is dimmed. Now, other purposes of sexual energy is that it can be used for healing and for transformation. It's basically important to understand that your sexual energy is the most powerful energy source that you as a human can tap into, that you have access to. Because this energy, as I just mentioned, can actually create a new human. So if you channel that energy, if you direct that energy into a different purpose, for example, for healing or for transformation, then basically the sky is the limit. Now, what's important for this to happen is that we understand the two different ways in which sexual energy can flow. One way is that it flows basically down and out. And this is what we're most used to feel in our body, is that the energy is basically located in our genitals, in our pelvic floor. And that is also connected to those two initial purposes. So when we engage just for the act of pleasure, or when we engage for procreation, like literally the energy for men also goes down and out when they ejaculate. It comes out of the body. If you can have this Amrita kind of squirting release as women, that's also similar there. So basically this flow of sexual energy is really linked to our primal instinctual nature, to really like grounding us in the physical world. And so that is a down and out energy flow of sexual energy. Now, there is another way in which that energy can flow, which is in and up. So it's basically reversed. And this is something we haven't been taught, of how to basically run energy in and up the body. I'll give you a little glimpse of how that can work, is basically by using breath, movement, sound. We call them the 3 tantric keys. That is essential. Learning to really like breathe the energy in, allowing your body to move so your whole spine is alive, and also making sounds will help to connect it actually to your throat, which is higher up. So in and up. So those 3 tantric keys will help you to draw that energy in and up, and then you become capable and able to use it for different things in your life, for more creativity, for healing, for transformation, for manifestation. And this energy flow also makes it possible that your whole body basically gets filled with this energy, with this vital life force energy, which really, really supports your health and your radiance and your shine as a woman or as a human. And so specifically in Tantra, we offer many tools and practices for you to work and cultivate the power of that sexual energy. Learn to basically invite it in and up, and then being able to channel it into whatever you like. This is basically really empowering you. And so here you can also see the core reason of most likely why we haven't been taught this, because if we all would be able and so connected to our sexuality, that makes us basically uncontrollable. That makes us really, really powerful. And so if we're looking at a society and the conditioning that we got around, okay, let's just follow along, let's all kind of like walk the same path, that makes us more organizable, controllable, then of course you're not going to be teaching them all about their sexual energy, because people will just actually walk their own path and do their own thing. And now specifically when it comes to interactions with others that have a sexual or intimate nature, I wish that I was taught to really understand this principle of sexual energy and these different energy flows, and have been taught how to unlock and uncover that in my body, because also this gives the possibility in connection to someone else to basically be sexual or be intimate and to play with that energy without needing to physically have sex. I feel in this way so much drama can be avoided, because when we physically have sex, there's this exchange of liquids, there's this exchange of fluid, there's this exchange of so much biological information that if we have sex with many, many people, that's like a lot of information to take in. Specifically as women, we are receptive when it comes to our sexuality, in the sense of literally our yoni, our vagina goes inside of the body. So we receive a lot when we physically have sex and get penetrated. Also, when we're having this physical sex, it's so much more likely that there is drama that gets activated, or past pain, or anything that's been hiding in the mud, because basically you can see your root chakra at the very core, your sexuality, your instinctual nature, as this very like muddy primal foundation. And we hide a lot of shame and blame and pain in that part of our body, or at least there's a lot of that connected to this aspect of ourself. And so that tends to come up, specifically if we have physical sex with someone. It's way more likely that that gets triggered, where if we're having more energetic sex, then actually it's way more likely that interactions, sexual interactions between people and connections like that are opening up pathways to inspiration, to healing, and to transformation. And so, literally, in my life, I've experienced and had sexual interactions with people where our clothes were on. We didn't have any like physical genital touch or even kissing or all of these things. And it felt like I was actually making love with the person, where I felt I was so orgasmic just by purely running sexual energy in my body, by playing with that tension field with another person, inviting that energy to flow in and up. It really expands the capacity and the possibilities of what you can experience also in connection to someone else. So that means that, oh, if you've been taught this, you don't always have to have physical sex. It can look so many different ways. It gives so many different options. And so, specifically in connection to a partner or in your relationship, what this also does, it opens up the spectrum where now, instead of only having physical sex, you can also have more energetically sexual experiences. And you can see now that you get like a whole spectrum in which you can play. And also, therefore, you can play with the balance, create basically a dynamic balance between these two. And when we create a dynamic balance, when we have basically two opposite sides of a spectrum that we are in touch with, that we can play with, then we make sure that there can be a continuous flow. Because if we only know the physical way of sex or sexual intimacy, over time, there's going to be a moment where we're going to kind of like burn out or run out of inspiration, where this basically stagnates and dries up, because this is the only focus. This is the only thing that we're doing. And in life, we're constantly basically flowing between opposites. That's how we stay moving. That's how we stay alive. That's how we stay healthy, is by having a flow of energy that continuously is happening. So also, basically, when we're looking into how does a disease happen, basically looking at it from this Chinese medicine Taoist perspective, it is because energy stagnates in the body. It gets kind of stuck, and then that's what basically creates the illness. What's important is to bring life force flow back into it, and then the body can start healing and keeps itself nourished and healthy. Now, this very concept of the different ways in which sexual energy can flow also lies at the foundation of another thing that I wish I was taught. And that was basically the connection between my sexuality, my heart, and my spirituality, and finding ways to basically bridge all of those together, making for way more fulfilling sexual experiences. And this is where the concept of love appointments comes in. Love appointments are basically tantric meditations, including sexual union. So me and my partner, very early on in our relationship, we were dating for about 5 weeks, stepped into a tantric training specifically designed for couples called the soulmate training. Now, this training specifically taught me about the concept of love appointments. As I mentioned, tantric meditations, including sexual union. And basically what love appointments do is that they use this very primal, instinctual aspect of us, which is sexuality, having sex, to connect that to love and to connect that to spirit, to connect that to something higher than ourselves. And basically, love appointments, therefore, can really inspire healing and transformation, because healing and transformation are specifically linked to our more spiritual self, to our more divine kind of self, because we're transforming to grow and to expand and to become a more aware, conscious human, basically. And so the concept of love appointments has really helped me to understand, I can use our intimacy, our sexuality, and basically it can invite more healing and transformation. It can connect and include my heart, my spirit, all different aspects of myself are all welcome in sexuality. Where I feel many of us, and also how I was, it was like sex is sex, that was just like a separate thing. And it often actually confused me, because it would leave me confused and like having all of these stories, and my heart would be kind of like confused and not really understanding what was going on, and maybe feeling heartbroken or wanting more and not receiving that. And so I behaved and acted a lot from sex is this separate thing. And I really, really tried my best to be like, I can have just sex with a person and that's it. But through that, I also kind of forced myself to be something that I'm not, in a sense of at least deny aspects of myself, specifically my heart at that time, where I was like, well, I can just have sex and I don't need to fall in love or get attached. And over the years, through all of my tantric trainings and learning really about my instinctual biology nature, how I function as a woman, I started to see that that's actually not possible to begin with, because as a woman, sex and love come together. Like my brain is designed, women's brains are designed to basically combine these two automatically together, for the reason that, okay, if we have sex from a very evolutionary biology kind of standpoint, then we become very vulnerable in the sense of we might then have to carry a baby for 9 months, then have to go through this process of giving birth, then having to raise and feed the baby. Like if you imagining us being in a wild, crazy jungle where dinosaurs are walking around. I don't think humans were alive when there were dinosaurs. Anyways, imagine tigers and all these kinds of other threats happening. Then it's very important that we have support and safety and security that's being provided for us. And so nature made sure that, okay, if we have a sexual interaction, if we have sex, there's a part of us that gets kind of like addicted to a man. There's actually such a thing that if a man ejaculates inside of a woman, the woman's body actually gets addicted to the man for about 30 days, which is basically about one menstruation cycle, to make sure and to get clarity on whether she's pregnant or not. Besides that, basically the body was like, okay, then let's fall in love with this person, because you're more likely than wanting to stay connected and focus on the connection with this man, which most likely is going to give you and provide security and safety in case that you are pregnant. So information like this just like blew my mind. And I was like, oh my God, if I just would have known this, at least I wouldn't have kind of like fought against myself so much, or blamed and shamed myself, and kind of like disconnected myself or disconnected me from a part which is just naturally there. Now, this leads me also to another kind of principle or thing that I wish I knew about my sexuality, and that's about the connection between love and sex, where I just gave a little intro to that. But basically, it's called this concept of spiral to heaven. Spiral to heaven is basically the doorway or the pathway to ultimate bliss and orgasmicness and this deep, like, sexual fulfillment. Basically, heaven. And learning that the spiral to heaven, the way that we spiral to that place, is really different for men than for women. And this is again connected to the way that our body is wired. And so for women, basically the doorway into that spiral to heaven, the very start is love, is her heart. So that means for a female body to really open up and start this pathway to heaven, to ultimate bliss, she needs to be connected and activated in her heart. And this is actually something that can be seen in the sense of, think about, have you ever said to a man before you wanted to be intimate or sexual with him, before you really felt like you wanted to open up and explore that space, there was this kind of like desire of like, but I want to connect to you first. I need to feel connected. I want to feel your love. Like, can you just open your heart? Like, for example, have you ever said to a man, just like, open your heart. I just want to feel you there. And so the reason for this being is because that's really important for us to really start opening up in our sex center, in our yoni, and that basically opening up the pathway to ultimate bliss and pleasure in our whole body. And so that means for a woman to be fully satisfied, what's really helpful is to start from the external perspective. So the spiral is basically from outwards spiraling in, and the start of that spiral basically being this sense of connection and love and her heart. So what's really supportive for women is like, okay, think about the environment in which we are potentially going to be more sexually intimate being really nice, like nice lighting, candles, incense, but it might already start before that with like, okay, having flirty text messages during the day and just like having this kind of like teasing and already feeling and playing with that can already feel really sexual for women and really like activating. And then slowly, we're working more towards the body, towards the center of the spiral. And so that means it can be really nice for a woman to be touched first on non-erogenous zones. So for her to be held either in her womb and really allow her to soften into her feelings and into her like emotional body, because that anchors her really into and connects her really to our primal instinctual nature as a woman and to her feminine power center. But also like just holding a shoulder or holding a knee, or just in generally just being held and cuddled, maybe even just given compliments. And then slowly, okay, activating more of like the neck or the like more erogenous zones, or maybe kissing. And then eventually making your way to the breast and really stimulating and activating the breasts, knowing that there's a direct connection between the nipples and the clitoris. Like there's an actual, like there's nerves connecting those two. And that will slowly then open her yoni. And when her yoni is fully ready, then receiving penetration or more stimulation in general around the yoni, inner thighs, then lips. You can play with external vulva, and maybe at some point being ready for penetration. Now, that really, really activates all of this sexual energy in her whole body and becomes this doorway to heaven. Now, for men, this is the other way around. So the spiral starts basically at the core, which is the sex center, and then spirals outwards. So their pathway to bliss is differently. And this can be seen or is often expressed because men will very quickly go to our yonis. Because the thing is, we often give to the other what we would like to receive. So where I say to women, where you're probably going to be, I don't know, kind of like caressing him somewhere and then teasing him here and like cleaning up or something. And then you're expecting him to be like, oh, getting the clue and being all juicy and activated. The same for a man. What he will try to do is probably sort of go to your yoni or pleasure you straight on your nipples or your breast, because that's basically what he would like to receive, because that's his door into ultimate bliss. And so for men, what's really helpful is to basically be worshipped and honored in their sex center first. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to just give him a blowjob or jerk him off straight away, although I'm pretty sure no man would obstruct or complain when that happens. But there's different ways in which you can honor their sexuality. You can just like bow down or hold the sex center, or like at least really like honor his sexuality and don't blame and shame it, because these days I feel like a lot of women and a lot of jokes are being made about a man's sexuality. But basically what that does is cuts them off from their masculine power, but also cuts them off from basically entering next levels of bliss and starting that spiral to heaven. Now, once a man is activated in his sex center, then what can happen is basically spreading the energy around into all the other parts of the body. And that's basically how he can also fully get activated in next level pleasure and orgasmicness and bliss. Now, I wish I was taught these kinds of principles and tools on how to do this. And this is also something that we teach, kind of like these kinds of approaches and how to apply this principle, how to basically do this and activate this for each other, because it would lead to so much less misunderstandings between men and women, so much less unsatisfaction and confusion in the bedroom, and therefore us basically closing down and disconnecting because we're not receiving what we want. It basically goes against our nature. Because I mean, when a man just, for example, straight goes to your yoni, what our body does is basically kind of like shuts down. Like it does the opposite of opening the doorway to next level heaven, to next level bliss. And so that kind of creates a little contraction and a shutdown. And over time, if that's just constantly what we do with each other, we create disconnects and slowly we drift apart. And if we would have been taught these kinds of things and the ways in which we can then start bridging them, you can see that we can actually form a team as men and women, because we're just designed to fit like lock and key. We're like perfect teammates. However, we have to know how to work with those differences instead of letting those differences basically confuse us and put us more on opposite sides of the spectrum, and then just being like, fuck you, man, fuck you, women, no, my partner, like I'm right, you're wrong, etc. That kind of battle. That's not getting us anywhere. Now, one more other big concept that I wish I was taught around sex and a different approach to sexuality is linked to what I was already mentioning before. But specifically, I want to highlight sexual position and a method, what we call yin plug, and the Reza method that is connected to that, where basically sex can have a yang kind of expression, something we've been more taught, where it's around like the goal is reaching orgasms and really having this pleasure, and it's this fiery kind of experience to it. But on the other side, we also have this more yin-like kind of experience, which is more about slowing down, about softening, and the intention becomes more cultivating a deeper connection, cultivating more love with your partner, and not so much cultivating pleasure and orgasms. Now, this is very foreign for many of us, because the only thing that we do see about sex is orgasms, is pleasure, is like, screaming and like all the like multi-orgasmic things. And even in tantra or tantric teachings, what you will see out there when it comes to tantra, it will be like all about activating your kundalini and becoming multi-orgasmic. And so that still kind of like really points the arrow towards the more like fiery yang kind of like pleasure kind of experience of sex. But there is a whole different spectrum to that. And this is the more, as I mentioned, the yin kind of experience to sexuality. And so the intention is just very different, where the focus is not on sexual passion per se, but on love, deep connection, and a more spiritual feeling. And I want to highlight here the Reza method specifically, because this is actually a method that has been done like in the 1900s, end of the 1800s. And so I want to just share a little bit on the history of that. I'm going to read it, so I'm going to get the names really right. So basically, the Reza method is a gentle, affectionate sexual intercourse. The word Reza comes from the Italian word carezza, meaning caress. And so the goal of carezza, unlike most kinds of sexual intercourse, is not orgasm, but reaching a relaxed state of union with your sexual partner. Now, the history of this method is recorded in a book called the Reza Method out of 1931, a book by a sex theorist called J. William Lloyd. And according to Lloyd, the Quaker doctor Alice B. Stockham is responsible for naming the practice and popularizing it in the United States. But he basically also wrote that there was another guy, 1844, who actually discovered this. Now, I find this very fascinating because basically this is something that has already been researched a long time ago. And there was actually a woman that was inspiring this. And that's very logical because actually the more yin aspect, this focus on like, okay, making love for deep connection and for like a really, really like loving, relaxed kind of experience is the more feminine aspect, where the focus on like sexual passion and fire and yay and going and reaching orgasms is more of the masculine aspect of lovemaking. Now, what's really interesting to know about this method, and this is specifically based on this approach, what we teach is something called the yin plug. And that is basically a position in which you can practice this Reza method in the sense of where you can drop into a deep space of meditation and relaxation, where there is no action happening, where there is no need to perform anything. And in this specific position, the lingam or the penis can basically rest inside of the yoni or vagina without having to be erect and not slipping out. And this gives the option to fully drop into a yin relaxed space where you can still have this connection of the genitals, which is super powerful to do, specifically if you have a sexual intimate partner, because there's basically acupressure points on the outside of the lingam and acupressure points on the inside of the yoni. And so when they are connected, when there's penetration happening, they will connect. And that will create like a bioenergetic current in the body, a flow of energy that can then actually be used to create a deep space of healing or transformation without you having to do anything. So remember when I was talking about the science of like, okay, sexual energy needs to be in flux, needs to be in flow. That's directly linked to our health and feeling really grounded and connected in your own body. So this is actually something that you can cultivate through practicing this method, where actually you don't have to do anything. Because the thing is, we often think that we have to do something, like actually doing something to create that flow. But no, the flow happens because of the balance between yin and yang, where the yang is more of the doing, the yin is more of the being and not doing anything and relaxing, but still being open in your energy system. And so very often problems in sex life or in connection in a couple or in a partnership, they get created because there's just like in the energy field, there's something stagnating. It's not like in flow. There's not like this alignment. And therefore then our minds give stories to it. And they're like, oh, this must be the reason because he's never taking out the trash or he's working too much. And oh, like whatever excuse you want to blame or shame your partner. But very often what actually needs to happen is that our bodies need to come back into sync, into a space of love and connection. And actually using our sexual energy, that most powerful transformation, manifestation, creation force, is going to be very efficient and helpful for that. Now, the problem is that if we haven't been taught this yin approach, then the only doorway into sex is more of this like fiery, desire-y kind of space. And when that's not alive because we're feeling a little like off in our alignment, then that stops happening. And so we're not going to be sexual. And then over time, it just dries up. Now, this yin approach gives an opportunity to still connect sexually with a partner, even if you're not feeling in the mood, even if you're tired, even if you just want to relax. And this will actually also cultivate more relaxation, yet having this very, very powerful bioenergetic connection that can actually solve many of your problems. And so basically, there's been research done, not just exactly around this specific method, but around this concept where basically this woman from the Reza Method was inviting couples to practice this for at least like 40 minutes on a regular basis. And she saw couples' problems basically magically disappear. And so this yin plug, I also like to call basically the sex position that can actually save you money on couples therapy, that can save your relationship, that can revolutionize your sex life. And that is most likely something that you didn't know you even needed. And what I've seen working a lot with couples and in the tantra trainings where we explain this method and where we introduce this position is that so many couples are like, oh my God, thank you. This was like something we needed. Couples that go into and then couples that realize and that couples that come back saying of like, oh my God, this opened up a whole different dimension that we weren't even aware of. Thank you so much for basically enhancing and deepening our sex life and our sexual interaction, because this basically opens up a pathway and a door into our connection, into our sexuality, into our sex lives that is so deeply fulfilling and nourishing, and also just creating this deep sense of like relaxation and ease that, oh, okay, maybe we don't always have to go for these like deep orgasmic, pleasureful, multi-orgasmic kind of experiences. Maybe it's also okay to just sometimes plug in, rest in this yin plug position and just rest for 20 minutes, or to fall asleep like that. Or that even if there's no desire or we're not in the mood, we just rest and we still connect and we still open up to each other. And so this is also exactly what this client walked away with from this session that we had. This realization and this permission of like, okay, even though there is none of that juice and desire and all of that spark between you two alive right now, you can still try to connect. You can still try this method out. It doesn't have to be anything. It can be boring. It can be just like not super interesting. You might feel a lot, you might feel nothing, and that's totally okay. So this brings me basically to an end of this podcast episode for now. There's so much more that I could share about this, but I'll leave it here. Now, if you're interested to learn more around this and to really understand your sexuality, then I invite you to put yourself on the Academy waitlist. This is basically my newest program and offering that I'm working on, which will provide you with a proper education around all of these topics that I feel like you should have been taught about when you were growing up, to understand what it means to be a woman, to understand your sexuality, to understand how men work, how to relate, how to create nourishing sexual experiences, and so much more. So put yourself on the wait list to be the first to know more once it's ready to be launched. Besides that, another thing is put yourself on the Bridge list. This is an email list where I keep you posted on any other Bridge related events or workshops or retreats or online programs that I'm creating. So you'll be the first to know more once a new event or something comes out. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Now, before you tune out, if you felt inspired, enjoyed listening, had some beautiful insights, I would really highly appreciate it if you could leave me a 5-star review. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or anything you would like to share. You can do so on my Instagram at Dieke Terwil. That is DIEKETERWEEL. I hope to see you in the next one.